Hello?
Hi, Joyce.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
See me? Yeah.
It's really lovely to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Yes, I think it's going to be a heat wave here. It's starting today, it's quite warm, but I've been indoors quite a bit. And yesterday I was at the 92nd Street Y with Gillian Flynn.
Yes, yeah,
That was
I saw the
wonderful. It
picture
was
of that. Yeah.
lovely to meet her. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, it's extremely hot here in London and it's due to get even more warm over the next few days. So, yeah, it's
Oh,
quite
wow.
worrying.
You have a little garden in back? Yeah.
I do, yeah, it has lots of wonderful roses and a big rosemary bush.
I like to see all the books behind you. That's a very nice background.
Yeah, it just happens that this is my study where I work, and yeah, this is the best space for me to record. So have all of my books here. But I want to congratulate you on the publication of your new novel Fox, which when we're recording this today, it was published in the US yesterday, and it's being published here in the UK tomorrow. So that's very exciting. But also, I wanted to belatedly wish a happy birthday to you, and I wanted to ask, did
Thank
you
you.
do anything to celebrate on Monday?
Well, my cats take it all pretty unseriously. There's a kitty right here. We could ask her. Lilith?
There she
Uh,
is. Hi, Lilith.
can't see. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see her.
She's probably not too particularly impressed with anything. When you live with cats, it's easy to be sort of modest and humble.
I'm very eager to talk with you about this new novel, which I found very atmospheric. It's gripping and it's compelling how it works on multiple levels. And for those who haven't read it yet, firstly, this is a mystery where a body is discovered and there are multiple suspects, and a detective conducts an investigation. And personally, I found it very effective in that I was constantly making my own guesses about who did it, and my suspicions kept shifting as more information is revealed. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but what happened is eventually solved, and the ending was a surprise to me. But I want to start at the very beginning of this book because you begin it in a way which is playful but also quite ominous as we enter into the story through the consciousness of a dog, a dog named Princess Di. And of course, as we see from Lilith, you are a cat lover, a longtime cat keeper, or maybe the cats keep you, and you frequently post about cats on social media. So, can you talk through why you began the novel in this way and the process of inhabiting a dog's mind?
Well, thank you, Eric. Um, well, I should say that the beginning is really the setting. This is a place where I often walk and hike, not literally in South Jersey, but a few miles from here. It's a sort of marshland area, what we call a green area. Not a park, but kind of a wilderness that's just been set aside for hikers and for animals to be undisturbed. So I often hike there. I mean, I hiked with my husband when he was alive, and I hike there now alone. And often when you look up, you see birds circling in the air. And sometimes they're turkey vultures, and there is often carrion in the woods, like deer die or raccoons or
Mm.
different sorts of animals die quite naturally. And the scavengers come to swoop upon them. So in this place, you often see birds overhead. And I was imagining what it might be like to follow these scavenger birds and discover that a human body or parts of a human body were there, and how that would then precipitate a story. Because I'm often thinking of how stories are generated often in a setting. So it begins with the setting. So we're already there. The reader is already there, and a vehicle pulls in I think it's an SUV, pulls into the area. We see a door open and a little dog comes bounding out, and the dog's human follows the dog. And then there's a long scene of a lot of sensuous details having to do with smell, particularly because dogs are so animated. And they can be made so thrilled and so happy by smells. They're particularly drawn to kind of ghastly smells that would be terrifying to us, like decomposition, carrion. The dog, certain kinds of species of dogs, I think, are particularly drawn to the bodies, decomposing bodies in the woods. So the dog is bounding along. She's leaving her mistress behind. The mistress is calling to her, and she's not paying attention. So it's a little bit of like a trajectory between a world of human control and then into this boundless nature with all the smells. And then the dog is becoming ever more doggy. The dog is leaving the human orbit of being controlled and is moving into the doggy sort of natural or savage element. So that's the idea of the first chapter. It was very challenging and fun to write. I don't think one could do quite the same exciting prose with a cat.
No, I guess they wouldn't be bothered.
Something about the dog bounding along and rolling over, lifting its leg and running on, and just sort of frolicking. Something that smells like decomposition to us is very repulsive, but the dog is drawn to it. And so that's the end of the chapter. We discover that the dog has found a trophy. So the title of the chapter is The Trophy.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the next chapter begins in the same place, not the same time, but it's almost the same place, maybe a half mile away. And this is a bird sanctuary. They're walking around a pond on planks in a marshy area, but it's sort of the same area, and the birds are overhead. We see the scavengers. And then the third setting is about a half mile away. It's all in the same area. And two young men come into the scene, and they have a truck, and they're workmen, and then they're in the scene too. So it's like the setting comes first, and then the people come into the setting. It was a little different for me to do that. I'm sure readers don't notice things like that, but for me as the writer, it was a different way to get into a story.
Well, it's definitely a surprise for me, having read a lot of your work, and to suddenly be in the consciousness and perspective of a dog was a really great and delightful surprise. But also, yeah, I found it very effective as you introduce a number of different characters who are going through this same location, and there is that constant image of the turkey vultures circling around, and it builds up into such a creepy sense, because you feel that something has gone very wrong here.
And the vultures are on the cover of the book.
Oh, yes, yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I made sure. I think initially there weren't any birds, and I said, well, the vultures are very important.
Yeah, that's a really great detail, which, I hadn't even really noticed, because I saw more the torn pages and kind of the...
I know, there's so many other things to look at, yeah.
And
well, next time you go hiking and you look up in the sky, you always see some birds. Lots of times they're hawks, and the hawks are circling. They have very beautiful flight patterns, very, very graceful. And the turkey vultures are a little more cruder. I'm sort of a bird watcher, and I'm very aware of birds.
And what inspired you to structure this story in the style of a classic mystery? It felt very reminiscent of like Agatha Christie or Wilkie Collins, but obviously you put your own kind of spin and use a kind of degree of psychological realism to tell the story.
I shouldn't confess it, but I've never read Agatha Christie.
Oh, wow.
I've seen a movie, and then there were none set on an island. I'm sort of not drawn to the sort of the locked room mystery situations, like old country estates. So I haven't really read Agatha Christie, but I wanted to do something. For me, it was experimental because I hadn't done it before. My novel Babysitter has the structure of a thriller, and I had not really done that before. It's cinematic with a historical present. So this novel too is historical present. So each scene is sort of like a movie where the camera is already there and then the people come into the scene. And I introduce all the main characters in the first 3 chapters. Technically, I'm always interested in how to present the story in some way that I haven't done before or haven't done too often before. I think readers are not at all aware or interested in these things. But if you examine a movie, for instance, the director always makes certain decisions about many things, like the lighting, and you mentioned atmosphere, the tone, like the musical tone. A movie has actual music and has actually sound. In prose fiction, there is something that's like tone, an atmosphere. It's achieved through the structures of sentences and repetitions of words. Sometimes the paragraphs are long and sometimes they're very short. The different things that writers do to present the story. So I'm always kind of trying to experiment a little with the presentation. The classic whodunit is not actually a genre that I have read much, and I don't know much about the history. Maybe Edgar Allan Poe historically speaking, Poe may have sort of invented the genre. Murders in the Rue Morgue, I think.
Really feel like that you do kind of stick to the sort of tenets of the genre in this, and in that, a body is discovered, there are a number of suspects, and there's a detective, and of course you have written a detective novel before, and one of my favorite novels of all time is Mysteries of Winterthurn, and which of course is a very different book from Fox, in that Winterthurn is in much more of a gothic mode, whereas Fox, like I said, is in this kind of psychological realism. But I was wondering if you could speak a bit about genre and its relation to writing literary fiction, and what are the constraints of genre, and maybe the pleasures of it as well.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Mysteries of Winterthurn. That was certainly a very experimental novel. So I think in the main part of the novel, as the novel continues, Xavier Kilgarvan is this sort of amateur detective, and we see him at different stages. One, he's just a boy, and he's a little older. Then the 3rd section, he's actually quite a well-known detective in a sort of 19th century tradition. And there I wanted to have the detective as somebody who's acted upon. The detective in that novel has to sort of deny the fact that he knows who a murderer is, but it's actually someone he loves. And so discovering the murder, I guess whenever I write about a detective, I'm writing about somebody like a writer. And the writer is exploring the material, and the writer confronts some knowledge that he or she doesn't want to acknowledge, And I think the same is true with Fox, where Detective Zwender is he has certain leads that are very plausible, but then they don't really pan out, and he keeps trying and trying, and then he thinks he knows who the murderer is. I don't want to give too much of the plot, but he is sort of a Buddhist, and he transcends this level of personality. He's thinking what's important is the commonweal, the community. So if you had a predator in your midst, in this case, really a terrible, conscienceless pedophile, the most important thing about the situation is to protect the community.
Yeah.
So the pedophile has been murdered, and in a sense, that's good for the community. It's sort of like getting rid of of a parasite. And then the detective is sort of looking for who did it. At the same time, he's very sympathetic with the murder. He feels that getting rid of this pedophile is very important. I don't want to make that too explicit in a novel. It's more just me talking now. But I think he says something almost like that. And his assistant or younger police officer feels the same way. There's a threat to their community from this person from the outside who should never have been allowed in the community. And he really is a pedophile and a predator. He's done terrible damage to girls. He's caused girls to try to commit suicide, in one case succeed in committing suicide. So it's really the case that you want to get rid of a pathogen. But then the plot really takes us in another direction, because the detective wasn't really right. He thinks he's right, and I think the reader feels that this is plausible. Mm-hmm. And I feel it was plausible. But then actually something else is responsible. And it's almost always like that in life. You think you know the reason for something, and it is plausible, but then there actually was another reason that nobody ever thought to look for. Mm. I think politically our situation is often like that. There's a lot going on. It's sometimes dismissed as conspiracy theories, but there's some things are presented to the public very openly, but then behind the scenes, there's probably something else going on that's being hidden. So that's what Fox is about, that a lot of things hidden in a community to protect people.
Mm. Yeah, and that definitely comes through, the moral complexity of that situation and the layers to it. And I also wanted to compare Fox briefly to your other recent novel, Butcher, because it felt striking to me that both of these books center around men who commit monstrous acts, specifically towards girls and young women. And not only do you graphically depict their crimes, but also the sensibilities of these men. And I think most writers would refer to their actions and personalities without fully inhabiting them, but you really go there, and you do. And for sections of the book, I felt frighteningly close to Francis Fox and could see the world through his eyes. So I wanted to ask, why did you choose to show us both his psychology and his deeds in such detail?
Well, I would never do any writing at all that I didn't dramatize and make credible. I mean, if you're writing a novel and you're saying that somebody is a pedophile and a horrible person, but then you never really show it, that doesn't seem, to me, that's not really writing. Mm. I really read to experience things that I have not experienced myself. It could be just wonderful descriptions by Charles Dickens or Thomas Hardy or D.H. Lawrence, really describing landscapes and cityscapes so beautifully. But a page of prose of Dickens brings us living right in the scene. Mm. So that's my ideal of writing. Melville's like that too. He just doesn't say, well, Moby Dick was a big white whale. He describes the whale in all sorts of ways, and we see it. We see the sea, we see the blood in the waves, we see the harpoonists, everything. To me, real writing is dramatizing. Hmm. And if you're not dramatizing, but just summarizing, to me, that's like notes for a novel. It's not really a novel. Hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Also, I'm interested in experiments. I have a lot of experiments in my novel, The Man Without a Shadow. There are neuroscience, psychology experiments. Some of them are real and some of them I invented. So Dr. Weir in Butcher is carrying on real experiments. He's also sort of crazy. Like, he does things that a real scientist would say, wait, now you're doing that wrong. But he's got the scientific spirit. It's just that he's a sort of crazy person. Now, he's based on real people, he's based on two men of the 19th century and one man of the 20th century. So the things that he does, all these experiments with surgery and hysterectomies, that's actually based on Dr. Cotton, who was at Trenton Lunatic Asylum for 30 years. But as I said, I'm sort of interested in the phenomenon of the experiment, and I may write about that more in the future.
I think you've mentioned in a statement about this book that also Francis Fox is based on a real case of that.
Oh, yes.
And part of I felt the horror of following Francis Fox is clearly seeing how he is both charismatic and very manipulative. And though there are warning signs, it's understandable that many people would fall under his sway. So I think on top of the inquiry into the body discovered at the beginning of this novel, this book feels like an investigation into how and why such a predator could continue to prey upon prepubescent girls for so long. So why do you think such an individual has so many enablers who will defend him against his crimes?
Yes, when you use the word enabler, which is something that really came to the fore, I think, with the Me Too movement and Harvey Weinstein. Obviously, there were enablers in the past. In my novel Babysitter, also, there's sort of a ring, a pedophile ring, and people who protect one another. And there are enablers, like among their relatives. I think it's been a phenomenon always, but we have not always discerned it. And it was often thought that these were lone, isolated misfits who were behaving badly. But now we're more likely to see that there's a network of enablers. Certainly with a person like Harvey Weinstein, there was a whole network of people helping him, assistants and friends and associates in Hollywood, really protecting him for not just a year or 2 years, but literally for decades. So I was much more aware of that and wanting to write about that, particularly in Babysitter, where a serial killer of young children is actually protected. And in this novel, it's suspected by some people that Fox is behaving badly, but they don't exactly have any proof. And we are all hesitant to make any accusations. Fox's fellow teachers were probably aware that there were all these girls waiting to see him, but that would actually happen if he wasn't a predator. In middle school, if a male teacher is attractive and friendly, girls would love him. Girls would adore him. He wouldn't have to be a pedophile. So it's very hard to know. One is hesitant to make any accusations. And in a novel I'm working on now, it's sort of the ethical issue of whether if you're pretty strongly convinced that a child is being mistreated, not fed correctly, sort of starved, would you dare to make an accusation? Now, in the United States, people who make accusations are sometimes sued. So a person finds himself in a lawsuit. It's very, the moral and ethical side of it seem clear, but then the legal side is there can be a countersuit. You can wind up being found guilty of libel. Many people are very hesitant to get involved now. So the novel I'm working on now sort of looks at that, the ethics of coming forward and risking a lot of trouble, or sort of staying hesitantly, cautiously, sort of not becoming involved. I honestly don't know what the answer is. I think it's something that people might debate.
Yeah, I mean,
for instance, Eric, if you were teaching at a private school and you thought a fellow teacher was misbehaving with students, what would you do? And people will say about Fox, people are telling rumors about him, there's always rumors. I mean, I don't know what I would do. I'm at Princeton University where the honor code is in effect and everybody swears to the honor code. It means that students have to inform on one another if they think that somebody's cheating. So if you think your roommate is cheating, you have to inform on your roommate. Almost nobody can do that, to come forward and inform on your best friend, let's say. But if you don't, then you could be expelled. So the honor code is almost like flypaper. If you do inform, that's a real decision. But if you don't inform, you're culpable.
Yeah, and it's a really difficult situation because,
It's so difficult. Yeah.
top of the potential punishment that might come at you or lawsuits against you, then there's also an awareness that when someone is accused of this, then rumors start more, and if it turns out not to be true, that it might damage their reputation. It might, So there's manifold consequences to it.
Yes, and it's exacerbated by the fact that pedophiles are often very charming, and their victims adore them. So the girls would never testify against Fox. They all defended him. You can't get a victim to make charges. What can you do? This happens often with battered women. They won't bring charges against the partner. So the police can't really do much about it.
Yeah, and I found it really heartbreaking how you portrayed a number of the girls in this story. There's one particular line that I found so tragic, where you write, she wanted only to know, am I loved? And it feels like that underpins so much about why the adolescent girls fall under Fox's sway and why they continue to remain loyal to him after he's gone. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about the dynamic between Fox and his girls, or his kittens, as he calls them.
Well, Fox always discerned that if a girl didn't have a father, like if the family was divorced, she would be much, much more vulnerable to him. And he would never approach a girl who had a father. He understands that would be dangerous to him. Well, young girls of that age, 11, 12, 13, 14, maybe older, often feel very insecure. Their bodies are changing and they feel self-conscious. And I just feel very sympathetic and kind of identify with girls like that. One girl is sort of prematurely developed for her age, and she is made to feel guilty because she has a kind of mammalian body when she's very young, and she feels so self-conscious. She wears loose, baggy clothing, and her idea in life is to be a librarian. So at one part of my life, I thought being a librarian would be just the most wonderful life. I still think being a librarian is wonderful. Teacher, librarian, those were kind of my ideals. And this girl would like to be a librarian. And Fox is sort of looking at her and thinking, what? With a body like yours, you want to be a librarian? And she's so tired about what we call the male gaze. She just doesn't want that. She wants to go somewhere. And she does flee. She goes to a safe place. I wanted to indicate that she was in a safe place at the end of the novel, but she leaves. Yeah, but I also wanted Fox to be funny. I mean, it's a sort of dark humor, but he's the one person in the community who's sort of cynical and skeptical, and he sees things with a sort of jaundiced eye that I thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
The way he manipulates the woman with the dog, Princess Di, complimenting her and her dog. He says, what an adorable dog. It's like her heart melts when she hears that. I know it sounds silly, but that's exactly how people are.
Yeah,
If you
and
compliment
we
their
see how
dogs,
privately he feels very differently. Yeah, his.
my my wonderful editor, David Evershoff, thought there should be one more chapter with a dog at the end.
Uh,
But the dog is getting kind of corrupted by Fox himself. The little dog is getting sort of savage, and the dog is getting kind of morbid and gothic. So I said to David, I think we've had enough of Princess Di. She's going to a dark place.
yeah, and it's quite disturbing. Some later scenes where you see the dog with its owner, and the owner starts becoming paranoid about how the dog is becoming more savage because of the memory of this trophy that the dog
Yeah.
has
What would
found.
you do if you? Well, what would you do if you had an adorable little dog, but it is a terrier?
Mm,
You know, they have this primitive desire to burrow and go after rats, I think.
mm.
And so you close the door and you're in your bed and you hear your dog scrambling, trying to get the door open. And the dog wants to jump into bed with you and kind of nuzzle your mouth. And that part of the novel was getting a little into the gothic, so I kind of drew back from it. If it were a gothic novel, I would have done a little more with Princess Di.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen,
It
and I
would be
find
it would be an exciting idea to take a very nice, normal albino, like a golden retriever, is like the number one American beloved dog, and then show the dog becoming more corrupt, turning against its owner, and all things starting to happen. But nobody would ever blame the golden retriever because that's like the number one dog in America. Maybe I'll write that someday.
yeah, it would be a great concept for a novel. And in addition to like Marianne, who you mentioned, who wants to become a librarian and just loves reading so much and losing herself in literature, there are a number of characters that I became really attached to over the course of this novel, especially Demetrius. And he
Yes.
he's a teenager who's a Christian. He helps his ailing father at his job, and he's painfully socially awkward and not literary. And he seems like someone who is kind of fallen between the cracks in society. And so I wanted to ask what inspired this character of Demetrius.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned him. He's one of my favorite characters. Well, Demetrius is a genuinely good person. He's on earth to help people. He is a Christian, though he's not an ideologue, and he doesn't think much about the theology, but he took care of his mother when his father and his brother didn't want to be with a dying woman. He instinctively protects his cousin, Marianne. He's very instinctively protective of the other girls that Fox has victimized. He's just one of these people in the world who will help other people without any fuss or even talking about it. Yes, yeah, I felt very close to him. He's analogous, I see now, in retrospect, to my character Ponytail in Babysitter, another young man who exacts vengeance. Now, in Babysitter, Ponytail does murder. He murders the babysitter, the serial killer. He shoots him. He actually does it. Whereas in Fox, Demetrius is involved in some way. We won't go into the details.
Yeah, don't want to give anything away.
He just, to me, is a very realistic person. Near the end of the novel, one of the students looks at him. He's in his custodian outfit. He's a janitor. And she thinks, there's a man in work clothes. He cleans up our messes. And that was I meant it to be a significant line. The working class person who doesn't belong in this prestigious world, he comes in and literally cleans up the messes made by the better off people, the intellectuals or the well-to-do people. He comes in with his pan and his mop and his vacuum cleaner and his bleach, and he sort of cleans up the mess. But then at the end, he gets a reward.
Yeah, I thought it was very touching following his trajectory. Yeah. and
Yeah.
what occurred.
So at the end, he's going to get a reward. He's going to have a good job. He might get sent to community college. Because it's a genre novel, things need to be tied up at the end in a way that I think literary fiction can be irresolute. It can just trail off into nothing. But genre fiction usually has very defined endings and explanations. If you read the entire novel, you will know what happened to Fox. You will know who killed it. You will know it's right there. It's nothing you have to speculate about. And so too, with Demetrius, we have a sense, the detective says, you need to go into the world and get married and have children and all the things that Jesus wants you to do. So we sort of feel that's what he will do.
And even though there are definite conclusions to this novel, I think, as we've been talking about, it opens up a lot of moral complexities and questions and things that, kind of can't be answered in different ways. And I also wanted to say how several of your books, including your new novel, but past novels such as "Do with Me What You Will" and "The Falls," there are strong preoccupations in these books with notions of the law and its relation to justice. And so often in our worlds, as all of us know, like, crimes go unpunished, and finding a path to justice through the courts can be very long and arduous and might not result in a positive way. So I was wondering if part of the point of this novel is to help reaffirm our belief in justice.
Well, there may be a difference between justice and truth, and what is just and good for the commonweal and what is actual truth. So it's decided that the coroner and the chief of police have decided that Fox died by accident, I guess. But they really think he died by suicide. But the fact is he died by homicide. So to the public, what is the best thing for the public to think? Best thing is for somebody to die by accident because no one's to blame. If there's a suicide of a public person, that's very demoralizing. If there's a homicide, that's very upsetting and demoralizing. But if it's just an accidental death, then it's kind of, the community is all right with that. Yeah, I'm very interested in the interplay between justice and, well, legal justice and then personal justice. I wrote a novel called Rape, a Love Story, where rapists are acquitted because they're in the community and people are defending them. They are terrible rapists, but they're acquitted. So there's no justice unless there's vigilante justice, which I don't think is a good idea, but I think it's natural, like an upswing in the community. If something isn't just, there's a feeling that it has to be made just. I find that a very intriguing subject.
And it's a really interesting dynamic in this novel, in that even though justice is, in a sense, served, it also feels like there's a tragedy at the heart of the book, in that the criminal pedophile Francis Fox will continue to be loved and celebrated even after his death, whereas Detective Zwender will probably be forgotten. So he's divorced, he suffers from health difficulties, and he mostly lives for his work. And I think at one point he thinks how he ought to purchase his own plot for his grave because probably nobody else will once he dies, which is such a heartbreaking thing. So yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a bit about this tragic dynamic of those who are acknowledged and beloved and celebrated, and then those who aren't, who kind of go under the radar.
Well, Detective Zwender is going to be promoted. He's a new chief of police. He's a chief of police in a small town, which doesn't mean much, but it's something. And then he probably will be in love with. He may get married to to a woman in the community. So it's not all negative, but it's so true about Fox. He will be warmly beloved, and there's going to be a poetry prize named after him. Is he won a poetry award by plagiarizing his poem from a whole lot of sources. I think that's pretty much the irony of society, that people who don't deserve it are praised and make a lot of money sometimes, and they're very famous. And then the reality is something very different. Today there is much more likely to be expose of people who behave badly, like Harvey Weinstein. But I'm sure in the past in Hollywood and Broadway and elsewhere, there are perfectly horrible men who preyed upon young women and young men all the time. We know that in classical opera, that was very well known. And those people are of an older generation. They're all, they passed away, so no one's going to expose them. But in the 21st century, many of these people are exposed. Some of them, like Harvey Weinstein, are very publicly exposed. Others are sort of fade away, and they're allowed to kind of make settlements. Fox News made some settlement with some victims of one of their stars, Bill O'Reilly. It was like $50 million they paid on his behalf. He had been a sexual predator. But he was never arrested, and there was never a trial. It's just that there are a lot of private things that go on. So Fox will be commemorated, and everyone will remember how wonderful he was and such a good teacher.
Yeah, which is something I got so worked up about, because I kind of wanted him to be shamed and exposed in this way. But of course, part of the process of the investigation is dealing with the sensitivity of this issue and what is really best for the community, and certainly sort of dragging his name through the mud or exposing him to this kind of scrutiny, probably wouldn't be. But you mentioned how Fox won a poetry award, the Edgar Allan Poe Poetry Prize, and Edgar Allan Poe really looms large in this story in multiple ways. So there is Poe's dark poetry, but then there are also aspects of Poe's life and a girl he fell in love with. And so I was wondering if you could speak about how he was one of the inspirations for the novel, or maybe a kind of dark force that is traveling throughout the book.
Yes, that's very true. I think Poe is so interesting because he was very, very drawn to prepubescent girls, or maybe dead women. There's never like a normal, healthy, alive, warm-blooded, happy, friendly woman in anything he writes. They're usually already almost dead, I guess, of tuberculosis. Or Ligeia, I think she may already be dead. The Fall of the House of Usher, and a number of poems. He said famously that there's no poetical subject quite so beautiful as a dead woman, a dead, beautiful woman. But he really meant a dead, beautiful girl. Yeah, I've written quite a bit about Poe. I have a long story about him in my collection, Wild Nights.
Yes, I love that.
That was based on Poe's last work of fiction, which was not completed, called The Lighthouse. He never finished it. It's just a draft, and so I kind of extended that. I think he's very much in a tradition of men who, while in many respects quite normal, Poe was the editor of a magazine, and he was a citizen. At the same time, in his imagination, he never wrote about history or politics or anything specific. All his fiction takes place in a kind of never land. It's sort of vaguely European. There are castles, but we never really see anybody very clearly. It's maybe a little romantic, German romanticism, or even medieval. It's always some other other world. And the women and men are not really human. They're more like wraiths or ghosts. They don't really have bodies. And if they are women, they're usually very young and very, very thin. He married his own cousin, who was only 14. She was probably about 13 when he first met her. And she was very, very, very frail. And she sang, she had a nice voice. She was quite attractive. But it's like falling in love with and marrying like a 10-year-old, you know. She was so little. And then she died. And he was in his 20s. A man in his 20s is attracted to a very, very immature girl of about 14 or 13. Doesn't seem very normal, except in that odd world of Poe, or maybe Lewis Carroll. The object of Lewis Carroll's attention was even younger. Alice was only 7. Mm-hmm. So I think fear of adult sexuality, fear of a woman who's normal, who would maybe get pregnant, have a family. Some men, especially in the 19th century, made a fetish out of really being repulsed by that. Mm. Now, maybe if I were a man like Edgar Allan Poe, the last thing I would want to do is get married and have like 11 children. You know, it may have been a kind of natural, instinctive detachment from the world of that time with the church and family life and having all these children, to fetishize somebody who's not sexual, who's just a beautiful face, like a very young girl. I mean, that does make sense in a way.
And Poe also enters the plot in this novel in a different way, which I won't talk about to give away any spoilers. But yeah, I enjoyed that aspect of it too. But also the novel Lolita plays a part in your book, where Francis Fox is surprisingly censorious and damning about Nabokov's novel, and he doesn't think it belongs in the library, yet he reveres the paintings of Balthus. So I was wondering if you wanted to make a distinction in this story about how we think about art versus pornography.
Oh, I don't know what to say about that, because I don't have a whole lot of experience with actual pornography. But Fox is just sort of, I thought it was very funny and very typical of people who behave so badly, but they're saying that somebody else is worse. He said, well, the girls that he likes are about 13 years old. Mm-hmm. They're 13 or 12 years old, whereas Lolita is 11. Now, he's saying, you know, what I'm doing is fine, but what Humbert doing is like, it's perversion, you know. Yeah, but I think that's very typical of people who are guilty of something themselves, that they look around and find somebody they think is worse than they were. And also, just as the writer, I wanted to give voice to the girls. Like, we never hear from Lolita. We only hear Humbert going on and on and on and on and justifying himself. But in my novel, we hear from more than one girl. There's several girls who have their own perspectives, and there are some women, and there's sort of a whole community of people. And Fox has only one voice, whereas Humbert dominates the whole novel. In my novel, the character is just one person, and he also becomes incapacitated. Like, really, the community does get its revenge on him.
Mm. Yeah, I guess I meant that you know, some people view Lolita as maybe, if not pornographic, as immoral, and people also have very strong opinions and reactions to the paintings of Balthus, and I think in the museum in New York, there was a kind of petition to try to take down one of his paintings, and I think the public finds, you know, some of this art very difficult to take, and yeah, finds it very morally questionable in this way.
Well, that's true. I think everything is sort of relative. Balthus may have been a particular target of some very woke people, but there are any number of classical painters who could also have been targeted. It's sort of a fashionable thing, like you discover that Picasso did something, and so you get people to sign a petition to get rid of Picasso. But alongside Picasso in the gallery is Gauguin and other people, Caravaggio, people who behave very badly, but you're focusing on one person, in this case, Baltus. But that's like very small part of culture. Obviously, go to Waco, Texas, you'll find community standards are very different than they are in Paris. The kind of libertarian attitude toward sexuality that you might find in Italy, you're not going to find in some small town in Georgia. They ban books all the time in Florida, in our red states. In other parts of the country or other parts of the world, those books are bestsellers. Toni Morrison, Mark Twain, Kurt Vonnegut, all sorts of people are not even allowed in some parts of Florida. So this is some of this is just hypocrisy too. People getting together and signing petitions, and particularly in the case of novels, I doubt that anyone has even read Lolita. Lolita is very literary, and all of the charm of Lolita is Nabokov's style. You'd have to page through it and underline certain sentences to be offended, because most of it is just this elegant language. I doubt that the book banners have not read it, I'm sure.
And you mentioned giving perspective to the girls, and so I just wanted to mention quickly how I admire from your short story collection, Beautiful Days, the short story Le Beau Jour, which does give the point of view to the subject of a Baltus.
Baltus. Thank you for remembering that. Yes, well, I actually have a little book on Baltus. By that, I mean I had a little introduction to a book of some of his color plates of Baltus, so I was looking at his work. It's hard to assess this. I have strong feelings about Sally Mann and Deanne Arbus, Mapplethorpe. I mean, there are a number of distinguished photographers whose subjects are almost unbearable to look at. You feel, are they exploiting these people? Should they be taking a picture of a nude child, a 4-year-old child who doesn't have any, any agency to give consent? At the same time, if they're artists, are they held to a different standard? But should they be held to a different standard? It's really a debate. I actually don't know what to I don't know what to think. If I had a mother or father who was a photographer who took pictures of me when I was really little, without any clothes on, and then I grew up and saw them, I think I would feel very upset about that. But maybe my reaction is not important. Maybe the art is more important. I think that's what's said about maybe Alice Neal. Some of her subjects, I'm not sure if they said this in any public way or just sort of privately. You have a certain dominion over your children. You can do anything with them, actually. But then they grow up and they might see the consequences of your putting them in photographs. I don't know. It's a subject I would think could be debated.
Yeah, it's a very tricky subject. I also wanted to mention how I found it really interesting that you referenced the Hindenburg disaster in this novel, where an ancestor of one of the families might have been the cause of the airship's explosion. So I was wondering what inspired you to include the reference to that incident.
The Hindenburg disaster took place not too far from where I live. So it's like a New Jersey thing. And it's fascinating. The whole story of the Hindenburg, it's very, very interesting. We had not declared war with Germany, but that was a Nazi vehicle. It has swastika on it, you know, and we had not yet declared war on Germany, but Germany was pretty bad in those days. I mean, leading to World War II, the things Germany was doing in Europe. So I could see very well somebody with a rifle who was like a sharpshooter just taking a little shot at that Hindenburg, which is very striking. It moved very slowly along, and it was not very secure. The kind of gas that was in it could easily be ignited. And then when it did explode, the explanation for the explosion seems very weak. I mean, when you read the explanation for it, it doesn't maybe make a whole lot of sense. But the United States didn't want to offend Nazi Germany, so they make up something about the weather or lightning or something. The whole thing seemed to me very open to speculation. And I love to write about things that are sort of well known in American history, except they're not really well known. You know, sometimes you look at something that's famous, but you really look into it, and a lot of questions that are never answered. I also like the idea that a relative of Demetrius's was a rebel, and maybe he did do this, and maybe he didn't. But shooting down the Nazis, I mean, in some way, maybe that was a good thing to do. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't do it myself, but the relative of Demetrius might have done it.
Yeah, and I found it just a really fascinating detail because I don't think I'd realized. I mean, I'd heard about the Hindenburg disaster, but wasn't aware that there was Nazi symbols on it when.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. There are many things in American history that are very bizarre. I mean, when something like Remember the Alamo, you look into this and really look into it, and relations with Americans and, say, indigenous peoples, different tribes of Indians, a lot of things that we were taught are much more complex.
And on a lighter note, I wanted to ask about, because there's one scene in the novel where the headmistress of the school, P. Caddy, and Francis are discussing playing the work of composer John Field on the piano and the joy of this. And I know you've spoken in the past about the pleasure of playing the piano, and you have a poem which is called White Piano. And so I just wanted to ask, do you still play the piano, and is this a kind of relaxing outlet for you as opposed to writing fiction, or kind of different?
Well, during the quarantine, I was trying to play the piano a little, and I took lessons for 10 years. So I attained about the highest level of my own capacity. Like, I'm not really gifted or talented. But if you take lessons for 10 years and you're dutiful, you get to a certain level, you reach your ceiling, like you can never get beyond that. So now, after decades, it would take me quite a while to get to that ceiling again. But I love piano music. I'm sort of just melt. When I hear John Field, I love John Field and I love Chopin. I could just listen to that music forever. I mean, all sorts of piano music. I like other kinds of music too. I like banjo and guitar, bluegrass music, klezmer music, certain kinds of jazz and folk songs. And I mean, lots of music that I like, but somehow John Field and Chopin and the sonatas of Beethoven, I just find so beautiful. Often when the headmistress is ruminating about something, she's pretty close to myself. She has so many blind spots, and so she's so lonely and so vulnerable to somebody like Fox. All he has to do is say that he likes her dog, and her heart just kind of melts, you know. And he's so adroit at finding the parts of people that are lonely and needy, and you know, the headmistress sort of has this armor. She meets the world and she's very much in control. She's tall and has straight shoulders, but really she's this person who's totally dependent on her little dog. Like they have this emotional bond Princess Di and Headmistress. And she's even P. Katie. She's somebody who presents herself to the world as asexual, like a career woman. And she doesn't even have like a first name. And she's so completely dependent on her little dog. Well, I'm sort of dependent on my cats emotionally. I was just trying to be very so gently satirical about this person who seems so secure and successful, but really she's a softie, easily manipulated. So that at the very end of the novel, when it's been shown that Fox has had a pornographic website, he's making money, she says, well, I'd like to hear his side of the story. You know, she's still thinking he's got a he could defend himself. How people say that all the time about terrible murders and public officials who do awful things. Well, what's his side of the story?
And you pull off quite a clever trick at the end of this novel. And again, I don't want to give any spoilers, but I don't think it's spoiling anything to say that many years after the primary events of the story, one of Fox's students becomes your student who submits a creative writing thesis where you're her advisor. So I was just wondering why did you insert yourself into the narrative in this way?
Well, I'm not really in the narrative. It's more the document.
Yeah.
That was always the plan. People think they know what a situation is. They think they know. All the adults think they know what happened. But then that wasn't really all the story. Like you find out years later that this happened. I think that happens to us all the time. You find out later that this was going on and you didn't know about it. Children grow up and they find out, oh, one of my parents had been married before and I actually have a half sibling, living in Cleveland. I mean, that happens a lot. You discover when you're 50 years old that you might have some relative somewhere, all kept secret. So that was just a nod to the reality, the complexity of life. And I thought if I did get a senior thesis someday, I get them every semester, every year. Often what people write for me at Princeton is very autobiographical. It's not confessional in the sense that they're confessing to crimes, but it's pretty clear that things are going on like in a family with divorce or infidelity or even child abuse, suicide of friends, suicide of a sibling. A lot of things are written about in creative writing that are achingly autobiographical, and the professor sort of has to pretend that it's fiction. I mean, that's the pretense. But what if I got something like this? I just present it as part of the evidence of the novel, along with things that the detective didn't know about. But if the detective Zender had been able to read that, that would have, opened up his investigation in another direction. It's just part of gathering the evidence.
And if I'm counting correctly, this is your 65th published novel. And you once said in an interview to an interviewer in 1972, I have a laughably Balzacian ambition to get the whole world into a book. And I think you've pursued that ambition with more dedication than probably any other contemporary writer. And now Balzac, he was often motivated to write more and more to pay off his gambling debts and to settle back.
I know, it was amazing.
But I wanted to ask, what motivates you to continue pursuing such a grand ambition to try to get the whole world into books?
Well, I don't know that I'm pursuing a singular plan. It's more like I really love to write. And I get ideas for stories, like walking out in the marshlands. Wonderful stories. I have a number of complete novels all outlined. I won't live to write them. I get more ideas all the time. I had such a powerful sense of overwhelming inspiration when I visited the Eudora Welty House twice in Jackson, Mississippi.
Mm.
I spent some time in the Eudora Welty House. And when I came home, I wrote all of this plot, like 10 or 12 pages of an outline, but I don't think I'll write that. It's just that sometimes the yearning to tell some story is so strong. But the novel I'm working on now is pretty much like a widow's story. My time of life, my phase of life is I'm a widow and trying to come to terms with the legacy of a man, of a husband, and sort of the aftershadow of losing somebody, and what do you do with your life after that? So it's about a widow who inherits a good deal of money, like an estate. She inherits something from the husband that's kind of morally complex. I mean, not to go into the details, but this is a situation where the husband did have a relationship before her and did have a son. So then being connected with that other stranger who was actually the son of her husband, but she never met him, doesn't know him at all. And that's like the precipitating factor for that novel. So it's not that I have a sense of a Balzacian plan any longer. That was more, I think, in the 1960s when I was writing novels like them. Set in cities. Now it's a little different. Like Night, Sleep, Death in the Stars would be in the same sort of genre where a widow is trying to find some way to move forward. I find that quite fascinating.
Yeah, I find it so powerful how you're always focused on the next project and writing the next book and having so many ideas. I think you have a shelf in your home that contains all of your books, and of course, like in addition to your novels, there's your many collections of short stories and poetry and plays and nonfiction, and since so many of us, I think, will never be able to write and certainly not publish that much, I was wondering what feeling do you get when you look up at that shelf and see all of your titles there?
Well, that's a good question. Should I try to show it to you?
Oh, sure.
I can walk through that room. I'm not in that room right now, but I probably don't really talk about it or think about it too much, but I'll see if I can show it to you somehow.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm walking through the house and I'm going into another room, and I've never done this before with Zoom. So now I'm standing at this. How do I do this now? I guess this is it. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the bookcase, and it goes down. I mean, I've never done this before. It's kind of weird. And then there's a little second shelf. There's another shelf there. So
yeah.
Okay, well, so now this is sort of, so that's the top shelf. And far over to the right, I guess, is my first book and my second novel. And this is a modern library of them.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
So there's By the North Gate and With Shuddering Fall, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they're all there. It's all. Yeah.
And I'm sure you find with, I mean, I definitely.
I've never done this before, so it's sort of not polished.
No, it's great.
At the very bottom. More recent books.
Yeah, With Night, Sleep, Death, the Stars. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
so
I definitely
here's
find. Oh, yes, great.
And then this is something else. So these are all more recent books. If I had known we were going to do this, I could have done it more smoothly.
No, it's fun to see.
Yeah, now I'm going to show you my garden. I don't know whether you can see anything. That's my
Oh
garden.
yeah, looking very green. Yeah, it's great.
Hoping I'm not seeing a groundhog. I sit here at my desk and sometimes a groundhog comes waddling along. I have to run outside. Okay.
And do you feel a sense of pride when you see all those books on the shelf like that, or a sense that you've succeeded in some way of achieving what you've set out to
You
do?
know, I don't think I really know what pride is. I don't feel proud. Um, I don't even maybe know what that would be. No, I'm usually focused on what I'm working on,
Mm.
and so it's like whatever I'm working on is what I'm thinking about. I guess in a way it seems unbelievable that I wrote all those books. It doesn't seem believable to me. It seems really unbelievable, and I can't explain it
Mm.
because it takes so long to write one page. I've been working on a short story now for, it seems like weeks.
Mm.
And it just goes very slowly, and I do a lot of revisions, so I don't know how I ever finished one book.
Mm.
But you mentioned Balzac. To me, he's so strange. Like he made so much money, but he was always in debt.
Yeah.
He was writing frantically.
Mm.
Why? And Dostoevsky was like that too.
Mm.
They were
Annoying
literally
as well.
writing
Yeah.
for money. I can't understand it. They were great writers, and they're writing desperately for money all the time.
It seems that to kind of go along sometimes with artistic genius. I mean, especially with men, I guess that they may have a great mind, a great imagination, but have no financial sense.
What's not even that, it's more that they're in debt, you know.
Mm.
They're making all this money. Well, one point, Scott Fitzgerald made like literally millions a year in the 1920s, but he was also in debt.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you even spend all that money?
Mm.
I have almost no expenditures. I don't spend money on anything except, I guess, food, you know, like, but these men must have been spending it on what? Drinking?
Yeah,
How
and
much can you,
gambling and bad investment.
I guess it was gambling. What fun is gambling? Do you gamble?
I don't, or very rarely. Yeah, I used to play
Well, I mean, it's
poker,
like
but
so silly. Who wants to gamble?
I guess it's a kind of embracing the I know embracing the sense of luck of hoping that it'll things will fall in your favor in just kind of almost like divine way.
I guess so, but even though in fact they rarely do,
Mm.
you know, to get in debt for thousands of dollars means that you're doing the same dumb thing all the time and losing. So, but anyway, it does seem amazing that anybody finishes anything. I think all these other books. I have a lot of anthologies in another
Mm.
bookcases, anthologies, and things that I've been involved in,
Mhm.
and it does seem kind of amazing.
And you've talked about some of the projects that you're working on at the moment, and your biographer and our mutual friend Greg Johnson mentioned to me that you've completed another novel. So I was wondering, what are the plans? Do you have planned to publish next?
Well, the next book that I will publish is a book of short stories
Ah.
called The Frenzy.
Mm.
And those are stories that Hogarth Press, with David Evershoff as the editor, will publish in 2026.
Oh, great.
So that's all completed, but I'll probably change some of the stories.
Mm.
It's called The Frenzy. There was a story called The Frenzy in the New Yorker a couple months ago, maybe in March or so.
Mm.
But I'm working on a story now. I'm always working on something.
Yeah.
It just, as I said, it takes all day sometimes to write a page, and then I revise it anyway. So I don't know how I actually accumulate enough for a book. It's hard to understand.
And I guess it's just dedication and time, isn't it? And,
I guess it's time, a lot of time.
but I did want to mention quickly, since I know our dear mutual friend Edmund White died a couple of weeks
Oh,
ago,
yeah.
and I wanted to mention how Ed once told me around shortly after the publication of his novel Fanny of Fiction, and how you gave him some practical advice concerning research, which I mean, he hadn't
Yes.
written much historical fiction before, and how one writes a book while conducting research, because otherwise if you'll forget much of what you've discovered when you sit down
Right.
to write the book. So you have to be writing it while you're doing the research, and I always found that very touching, and that he dedicated the novel to you.
Oh,
So
he was so wonderful. He was so wonderful. Did I send my you saw the Substack that I wrote about him, did you?
I did, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's a wonderful piece and
so
dedication to
touching.
life and work.
And wonderful pictures of Ed. He was very, very sweet.
Mm,
I mean, he probably knew how to do research for a historical novel. He's probably just being nice and saying that he learned from me. I mean, that's the way he was. He was just a very sweet person.
he was.
I miss him so much.
I do as well. Yeah, it's a really great loss. But if you think about it, it's kind of incredible that we had him for so long, to
Yes,
him being
yes,
diagnosed as HIV positive in the early 80s, and to happen to have been a slow progressor, to yeah, still have him for so many decades, and that he produced so many wonderful books. Yeah.
I know it's quite amazing.
Mm,
He had a lot of health issues, not related to the HIV, but other things.
mm,
And I don't think he was really that concerned about his weight.
mhm,
I think he was sort of really quite, you know, not concerned about his weight.
mhm.
And his husband Michael would probably know more details. But he just lived sort of a happy, contented, somewhat hedonistic life. Though he didn't smoke or drink,
Mm,
but he liked the good food and he liked desserts and he enjoyed life.
yeah.
Um,
So much energy.
sort of remarkable, like one in many millions.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. It's always enlightening, and a pleasure hearing you discuss your work, and I feel very honored to know you. So thank you for taking the
Well,
time.
thank you, Eric. And I'm sorry that Zanchi's outside. I was looking for her and she's hiding under a bush or something.
Okay,
But
that's
we had a glimpse of Lilith anyway.
yeah, that was good to see. Well, yes, well, say hello to Sanchi for me.
I will. Bye
And
bye. Nice to see you.
bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.